Thank you, Sam. I really appreciate the introduction and any chance I get to sit in your presence, because even just sitting with you is to learn from you. And I'm grateful to be with you and with everyone who's here with us today. Sam referred to me as a rabbi. I think it's just a way of him bestowing an undeserved honorific on me. I'm not formally a rabbi. I did get a late life PhD in Jewish studies and have approached my Jewish learning both from an intellectual and from an embodied perspective. And it's from the embodied perspective that I want to sit with you today. As Sam said, we have always in these sits, these are precious resource. I'm sure not just for me, as attested to by the fact that so many of you are here, not just to deepen our spiritual wisdom, but to strike a balance between the different spheres in which the human being lives, especially we human beings in our fraught day and time. Uh, and I find that in times like this, it's uncanny sometimes how the Torah portion brings a subtle message about where to put one's focus. And of course, Torah portions don't have one message, they have multiple messages that are always displaying their many facets. For me, this week, the Torah portion of Balak, which is found in the book of Numbers, gives a powerful message, not just about the power of nature, which of course we have witnessed in some terrifying and terrible ways this week, among other things in the floods in Texas, but that we regularly experience in its grandeur, even in the midst of the towns or cities or wide open spaces in which we live. And it's the power of nature that I find speaking from Balak today, and which will form the basis of our contemplative practice, some of which will be silent and some of which I'll guide you through today. So I'm not going to put any text up on the screen. I just want to talk about a couple of things in Parshat Balak. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, this is really one of the, I believe it's the only portion in the Torah that has an out and out comic episode in it. And it's a comic episode that's shared in a wide variety of parables in numbers of different cultures throughout history, and that is the parable of the talking animal. In this case, Balaam, a prophet, is summoned by a Moabite king, Balak, to curse the Jewish people who are camped out on the edge of his territory as they make their way toward the Jordan River and the land of Israel. The king, Balak, fearing Israel's reputation because they've passed through territory either unmolested or have defeated all their adversaries on the way to where they are, summons the prophet Balaam to curse the Israelites. On his way, riding his donkey, uh, Balaam has a fight with his donkey. The donkey simply refuses to advance. And it turns out it's because there's an angel of God blocking the donkey's way. The donkey winds up speaking to Balak and saying, because Balak, out of frustration, is beating him, that the donkey won't go forward. And the donkey finally speaks to its master and says, "You've ridden me all these years and I've never acted this way before. Why do you have some reason for beating me now?" Balakstun simply says, or Balaam rather, simply says no. And the minute he says no, the minute he realizes he has no good reason to beat this donkey, the veil, as it were, falls from his eyes, and he sees the angel of the Lord blocking his way. And he then is summoned to curse the Israelites from a bluff above their encampment, and he can't do it because he is only a messenger of God. And God puts words into his mouth, and as he makes clear to the king, Balaam says, "I can only say what God puts in my mouth." He says this, of course, after having realized that it is his own ego that he is listening to, and not the physical reality, the super physical reality that's presenting itself before him. From partially occluded views of the Israelites, twice he tries to curse the Israelites and he can't. Finally, he is taken by the king Balak to an unobstructed view where he sees the entire Israelite camp laid out before him. I want to pause here just for a second to mention a couple of facts. There were different kinds of prophets in the ancient Near East. Among them were diviners and sorcerers. Diviners had a deep insight into what was. Sorcerers tried to change or manipulate what could be. Balaam was a diviner. He saw what could be. And in an amazing historical fact that literally puts the hair up on the back of my neck every time I think about it, archaeologists actually found an inscription on a cave wall in Der Allah, Jordan, that mentions Balaam. It's in a Bronze Age carved out sanctuary on an Iron Age inscription, so from sometime shortly after 1200 before the Common Era, suggesting that this character, this diviner, physically existed and that this story has elements of truth that grew up around him. The one verse I want to read to you will be the basis for us to enter into meditation, and it's Numbers 24, verse 1. It says, Vayar Bilam ki tov be'enei Hashem levarech et Yisrael velo halach kepa'am bepa'am likrat nechashim veyashet et halamidbar panav. Meaning, Balaam, seeing that it pleased God to bless Israel, did not, as on a previous occasion, go in search of omens, but he turned his face toward the wilderness. What does this mean for us today, and what does the parable of the donkey mean? How do these fit together? As we begin to open ourselves to these questions, I ask you to settle into your body now, to feel the weight of your seat, to make a conscious effort just for now, to lengthen your spine, to the extent you can, imagine a string from the very top of your head up to the ceiling, gently lengthening your neck. To gently close your eyes. To breathe deeply and evenly. And to turn your face toward the wilderness. In this instance, the inner wilderness, the inner universe of your body. I know that many of us suffer in various ways from illness or chronic conditions or certain discomforts. These two speak to us, and in this meditation, even turning our attention, as we inevitably must, toward the vexations of the body as well as its triumphs, I ask you to turn toward the wilderness, meaning drop your attention down from your head and into the twin universes of your lungs. Although we cannot see inside the body, we dwell in the body. And as we center our consciousness in the twin universes of the lungs that continually, literally re-inspire us, we let thoughts arise and go by. And when they seize our attention and we realize it, we return our attention to letting the lungs spring open with new air and to give out old deoxygenated air. We'll do this for a few minutes in silence. Here at roughly the midpoint of our meditation together, you may be being seized by thoughts and not even aware of it, or you may be deep in meditation. But here I want to introduce one more thought, one more blessing. Bilam is unable to curse the Israelites, he can only bless them. And in perhaps the most well-known line from this Torah portion, he says, Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov Mishkenotecha Yisrael. How fair are your tents, O Jacob, your dwellings, O Israel. This can be used as a blessing of the soul of the mind and of the united consciousness to the body. The one vessel we have for all our brief lives, with all its flaws. This conveyance that's always the same but always changing. As you turn your attention inward, bless all the tents and dwellings that comprise your physical being. Shine the light of gratitude and wholeness and holiness upon them, however you may, but especially through the breath, so that in these last few minutes, inhale and exhale with more depth than you ordinarily would. Almost as if you were asleep and having a beautiful dream. When we end this meditation, I will give one more instruction before the end. In the last minute or so of our sit together, I invite you to pause briefly at the top of each inhalation and the bottom of each exhalation to the extent you're able to. Feel the lungs filled. And as you exhale, push out a little more if you're able to remove the stale air that gets trapped at the bottom of your lungs. A slight pause at the top, an extra push and a little pause at the bottom. Give one final blessing to your body. Thank it for its tents and dwelling places, for conveying and helping to construct your consciousness, and for bringing you here today. And remember as you go forth into the world that the body, like Bilam's donkey, is speaking to you. And do your best to listen to it with gratitude and an open heart. And when you're ready, open your eyes and rejoin this sacred group.
Thank you, David, for that beautiful practice. We're going to turn now to Mourner's Kaddish. So if you're reciting Kaddish for a loved one, a friend, anyone else, you're welcome to place their name in the chat so we can honor their memory. And for those who are not reciting Kaddish, the invitation is to offer our loving, compassionate presence and to respond, Amen. Amen is the Jewish way of saying right on. And we rise in body and or spirit as we recite Kaddish. And you can follow my lead. Yitkadal v'yitkadash.
Amen.
Divrach yivoteh v'yamlich malchuteh. V'chayechon v'yamechon v'chayed
Base Israel. La. Amen.
Amen.
Heshmei Rabba Mevarach Leolam U'Meel Maya. Yisbarach v'yishtabach v'yisba'ar v'yisroman v'yisnaseh v'yisadav v'yisaleh v'yisalal shnei dekudosh babrichu v'yisbachas havanechem Amiran b'yoma v'yimru Amen. Heshmei Rabba Shemaya Chayim Oseh Shalom b'maromav Yaseh Shalom Aleinu Yal Kol Yisrael Kol Yoshvei
Shalom. Hallelujah. Kol Yisrael, Kol Yisrael Tevel, V'imru. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. May the memory of those who have passed on inspire us to acts of kindness, compassion, wisdom, and justice. And let us say Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much, David, and thanks for everyone who joined us today. We're going to stay on for another 15 minutes for those who would like to share some questions and hear David's responses. And if you're leaving us now, we'll be back tomorrow at the same time. You know where to find us, and you're always encouraged to reach out to a friend and invite them to join you so our community can become even more expansive and we can connect even more souls. And if you're taking off today, I'm sending you off with wishes for well-being and peace and resilience during these challenging times. So if you'd like to ask a question, you can follow Julie Cole's lead here and preface any question with the word question in caps. It'll just make it easier for us to find those questions. And David, often what I like to do when I'm hosting is just recap what I heard and reflect it back to you. And then you can let me know if, I misheard or, didn't fully understand or what have you. So you shared with us this teaching about this week's Torah portion, and especially the ways in which, like Balaam's donkey, who was able to perceive something that Balaam himself couldn't see. The body itself speaks to us and discerns certain spiritual truths, even if our conscious mind may not be aware of those, even if our thinking mind may construct some sort of a different reality or be unwilling or unable to look upon certain spiritual truths. And you really kind of highlighted that in our meditation. That was really beautiful. You also spoke a little bit about how Balaam's curse came out as a blessing, and especially you focused on the verse where Balaam is said to leave his soothsaying kind of by the wayside and instead turn toward the wilderness. And you invited us to experience or turn toward the body as a kind of wilderness. And also to, in light of Balaam's blessing, Ma Tovu, to experience the different kinds of tents and abodes that might be present in the body from moment to moment, different perhaps places of refuge or sanctuary. That's my commentary. So David, I just want to make sure I kind of got that right and, understood where you were headed here.
That was beautifully said, Sam. I really appreciate that insightful summary, and it comes partly from my own experience in a sort of world and a time and a culture where, for me at least, there's a tendency to always want to fix and improve and to resist or overcome that which is painful or imperfect. And the body, especially when you get to a certain age, has its pains and imperfections, but those are ways that experience speaks to and through you. And in a meditation like this, my hope and my own experience is often that you can experience the body in radically new ways. And that is something that I think this Torah portion on one level is saying to us, which is that the veil can fall over our eyes when we are headed toward a certain mission. And, in many respects in rabbinic literature, Bilam is compared to Moses. He's like a flawed version of Moses, because Moses turns aside and sees, but until he is forced to, Bilam does not turn aside and see. And so when we turn aside and fully see without judgment, but with love and compassion, all that is possible and happening within our physical beings, we can drop down out of our minds, which these days can be anxious and tormented, and begin to experience a new way of being, a different way of being that informs everything else that comes after.
Thanks. And I'm hearing in your words there a comparison between Moshe or Moses at the burning bush, where he actually, according to the text, turns aside to look with curiosity to pay attention, to observe, even though if I personally were to see, a bush burning in the hot, dry desert, I would probably go in the opposite direction. Moses actually takes a step in, right, to pay attention, to look more closely. And that's when the angel reveals itself to Moshe from within the bush, right? And then another angel here in the story of Balaam is only visible to Balaam's animal because Balaam, refuses to actually look deeply into the nature of
That's
faith.
right. That's
Such
right.
a beautiful contrast. And I also love that because sometimes I struggle to understand exactly, what it is that the rabbis saw in Balaam that they found to be so problematic.
Yeah.
He's Bil'am Harasha, Balaam the wicked,
Yeah.
by the rabbis. And perhaps here we have a little bit of a deeper insight into why they see him
Right.
as
And in both cases, both Moses and Bilam turn towards something in the wild, right? Moses turns toward a natural and supernatural phenomenon, a bush that's burning but not consumed. Bilam turns to the wilderness, turns away from expectations and civilizations.
Mhm. Thanks. So that might give way to or provide the kind of groundwork for addressing Natasha's question here, who asked, did you say that Bilam was listening to his ego rather than God? If so, can you please say more about that?
That's interesting. Lots of commentators do say that he's that there's evidence that he is fond of his reputation, his prowess as a diviner, uh, uh, and that there are also very interesting messages in this Torah portion about the boundary between fate and free will. For example, Bilam says to the first messengers that come that he won't go because he can only do what God commands him to do, but he invites them to stay the night, and he'll see what occurs to him in the night, and they can ask again in the morning. God does not prevent him from going, but gets angry with him for going. Why? Probably because Bilam enjoys his notoriety and understands there may be something in it for him. God does not prevent our going. There's the famous statement that free will is given, but everything is foreseen. There are certain constrictions around our free will, but sometimes in our hurry to try to expand or enlarge or self-aggrandize, we don't understand that boundary, or we seek to override it altogether. So in modern and sort of more Freudian terms, maybe his ego does get the better of him. But it is also that he, in the pre-Islamic Arab world of the ancient Near East, kings asked seers to curse their enemies, and they would compose poetic curses. And oftentimes they would go to sleep at night to see if these curses would occur to them in their dreams. So it's not only a matter of ego, it's also a matter of formal practice of the time in some ways.
Yeah, thanks. And I really appreciated hearing about that archaeological piece of evidence that they found. That's quite amazing.
It's really thrilling and chilling.
Yeah. We have a question here from Julie Cole, because you did mention Balaam's words, which then became part of our liturgy, our morning liturgy, right? Actually, upon entering the synagogue, we're supposed to recite Balaam's words according to traditional practice. Ma tovu o alecha Yaakov. How goodly are your tents, O Jacob. Mishkenotecha Yisrael, your dwelling places, O Israel. So Julie asks, can you discuss the difference between tents and dwellings between Jacob and Israel? There seems to be a parallelism there between the two parts of the verse, right? How goodly are your
Right.
O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel,
Right.
but
Right.
also perhaps in the parallelism, perhaps a contrast. That's what Julie's asking.
Yes. I mean, this is a really insightful question. This kind of parallelism is frequent in Hebrew poetry and in poetry throughout this time and place. It is there partly for emphasis, but in the slight difference between the lines, something that would in itself be a wonderful thing to build an entire practice session around, part of what we see is the difference between an Ohel and a Mishkan, and a difference between Yaakov and Israel. They're sort of the same, but transformed from one to the other in each of these verses. In other words, an Ohel is really literally a tent. A Mishkan is an indwelling, not only for the human being, but in the case of the Mishkan, the site of the indwelling of the divine presence amidst Israel. Jacob is the name of the human being and the people, but Jacob becomes transformed after wrestling with the angel into Israel. So in the same way that our mere Ochel, the physical tent of our body, can be transformed into a Mishkan, a place for the indwelling divine presence, in that same way, we can be transformed from a Jacob into an Israel, somebody who has wrestled with the divine, struggled with the divine, and prevailed. So there's a message of inner and outer transformation in this doubling, which on its surface is merely for emphasis.
That's a beautiful interpretation. Thank you. I had another question for you, and then if we have time, we'll turn to a couple more questions from the participants here. You talked about the body as a wilderness, but I didn't hear you say exactly what you meant by that. Can you say a little bit more about what that means?
Yeah. So I go back to when I was much younger, watching PBS specials that put tiny cameras into bodies and explored the inner universe of the body. And as technology improved, it became more and more possible to see what had only recently been utterly impossible to see. Even if you were doing an autopsy, which was the workings of this entire complicated universe, from entire systems of bone structure and musculature down to mitochondrial action and the connection of tiny synapses in the brain. So often when we are inhabiting our conscious selves, we're in our head. But if we drop down, especially into the lungs, which literally re-inspire us, it's a gateway into seeing and in some ways experiencing the inner universe of the body, which is its own complex system, ecosystem, as it were. And to drop into that is to drop away from perseveration, thinking, planning, constructing, saying that thing to that person who pissed you off that you wished you'd thought of when you were with them, and all the things that arise as we're meditating. So to me, those early experiences of watching what it's like to rush through a bloodstream suggested a way for us to sink imaginatively and then experientially into the body.
Thanks. That's really helpful. That's really helpful. And realizing that we're almost at time here. So David, I really just want to thank you. And for those who are not able to have their questions answered today, you can feel free to hold those for another time or reach out to David. David, I don't know how you feel about sharing your contact info. No pressure. But if you would like people to email you, we can certainly put your email address in the chat. People also wanted to know if there's any teaching that you're doing online and whether you've composed any books or articles. So if you want to share any information to that effect now, we have just a couple more seconds before you wrap up.
Sure. My email address is dnormang@gmail.com. D is in David, Norman is in my middle name, and g@gmail.com. I've written a book, which was really my dissertation, which I don't highly recommend, about the importance of the binding of Isaac's story to the formation of Jewish memory. And my entry into contemplative practice was really through Zen Buddhism. And I wrote a book with an ultra-Orthodox rabbi about my experience in Buddhism and his responses about where one can find such experiences in Judaism. It's called Letters to a Buddhist Jew, and I wrote it with Rabbi Akiva Tatz. That came out more than 20 years ago. I'm at work on other writings. I've written for Tablet magazine a couple of articles about how Jewish memory works in everyday life and how the Jewish calendar inspires new views. And if you Google my name in Tablet magazine, you'll come up with those articles. I do periodically do other teaching, and I will let IJS know when that happens.
Wonderful, David. Thanks so much. It's wonderful to be with you again. And I apologize for my mindless misstep there in calling you a rabbi, but to me, you really are a teacher par excellence.
I greatly appreciate it.
Par excellence and a conveyor of
Thank you, sir.
wisdom and depth. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and depth with us today. And
My honor.
thanks everyone for joining us. And we hope to see you back here with us again tomorrow. Take good care. All the best.